Hello everybody, welcome to Go Bold. My name is Jody Atariwala and I will be your host for this series. Today we are coming to you from Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt, which is located on the western end of the township of Esquimalt in British Columbia. CFB Esquimalt is home to Maritime Forces Pacific, which is home to Canada's Pacific Naval Fleet. Here at CFB Esquimalt are Halifax-class frigates, maritime coastal defense vessels, submarines, and a number of training vessels. So in this series, you'll see and hear from people who serve in the Royal Canadian Navy that come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and all parts of Canada. You'll see what they do and some of their reflections on what it is to serve in the Canadian Navy. Admiral Topshee, thank you so much for joining me today on Go Bold. It's wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I'm excited to have this discussion.
Thank you, sir. Me as well. So, as I do with most of the people that I invite onto this show, I ask them, the tagline for Go Bold is talking to real life heroes. And so for me, I've had the honor and privilege to know you for a number of years, and I know you to be a man of outstanding character. And so I'm totally excited to have this chat. I would love to know how you actually got interested in the military, and how did you end up in the Navy?
Yeah, so originally I got in my head that I really wanted to go to the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, Ontario, and so I walked into a recruiting center and tried to sign up. It hadn't been that long since I'd watched Top Gun, and I had in my mind this idea of being a pilot, so I joined the Air Force and went off to RMC. And my first summer, the summer after my first year, I got sent out to Portage la Prairie to train on the Mighty Musketeer, and 17.2 hours of military flying time was enough time to convince the Air Force that maybe I should try something else. And I eventually found myself in the Navy. It's worked out fairly well. Yeah.
So how would you describe the Canadian Navy to people that might be listening to this show that are across Canada, maybe in the prairies, in Alberta, elsewhere in British Columbia? We are actually here at Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt. Mm-hmm. So we're on the west coast of Canada. But for people who might not be familiar with the Navy, how would you describe the Royal Canadian Navy?
Well, we're a really interesting organization because most of the time we're out of sight and out of mind. And if we're doing our job effectively, then no one should notice us. Because our job is to basically maintain freedom of the seas, and so to make sure that the commerce flows unimpeded, that the rules-based international order is maintained, because that free commerce around the world is what's critical to Canada's economic well-being. And so a lot of the time we spend our focus on understanding what's going on around the world. And so we're a globally deployable Navy. We go anywhere the government of Canada needs us to go, and it's just how do we advance and protect Canadian interests around the world.
So for those that are unfamiliar with what constitutes the pointy end of the spear, so to speak, when it comes to the Royal Canadian Navy, how would you describe the various ships that are in your formation? In your background, there's a picture of a Halifax class frigate. We're actually sitting aboard HMCS Ottawa right now. For those that aren't familiar with what the Navy has.
Yeah, so the workhorse of our fleet is the 12 Halifax class frigates. So they were recently modernized from a combat system point of view. Extremely capable warships, probably among the best in the world in anti-submarine warfare. Because we decommissioned our air defense destroyers, we're a little bit lacking in the air defense realm, but they are capable of protecting themselves. Then we've got 4 Victoria-class submarines, and the submarine force is housed here in Esquimalt, British Columbia. So extremely capable diesel-electric submarines that can take advantage of stealth to be where we need them to be without anyone else necessarily knowing that they're there. Then we are supported by, right now, Asterix, the interim the interim joint support ship. And then as we build 2 new ones to take care, and that's to sustain that Halifax class frigate abroad. Probably what we're proudest of right now is the delivery of the Harry DeWolf class. So that's the new Arctic offshore patrol vessel. Fantastic capability. Harry DeWolf just came through here after circumnavigating North America. Great to see a Canadian warship transit through the Northwest Passage. So that's an amazing capability that ensures that the Navy can be present in Canada's Arctic to ensure our security and sovereignty up in the north, but also provide services to Canadians on both coasts. Really an amazing platform from a humanitarian assistance, disaster relief point of view. And then we've got the Maritime coastal defense vessels, which are extremely capable small ships built in the 1990s, designed originally around mine hunting, mine sweeping, but now really the workhorses of the fleet that do whatever needs doing. Small ships with a crew of about 45, and right now 2 of them are deployed off the coast of Central America on an anti-drug mission.
Awesome, and that speaks to the reach of the Royal Canadian Navy. You've got those ships in the Caribbean area and in the middle of the Pacific, but talk to me about some of the operations that sailors in the Royal Canadian Navy undertake and some of the places that you go to. Perhaps maybe some of the highlights that you've had in your career as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is true what they say, join the Navy, see the world. And so just on the Maritime coastal defense vessels alone, in the last few months, we've had 2 of them deployed across the Atlantic to Africa and into the Caribbean. We've had 1 go all the way up to Alaska and participate in Arctic Edge, a U.S. and Canadian exercise to enhance Arctic security. And then we've had 2 of them all the way down to Central and South America on that anti-drug mission. So that's just the Maritime coastal defense vessels, and that's how far afield they've gone. We've got 2 frigates right now that are deployed to Europe in support of NATO and op reassurance, and we've got 2 frigates that are ramping up to go across to Indo-Asia Pacific later this year. And then on top of that, we have sailors who deploy around the world. So our fleet diving unit sends divers all across the Pacific and the Atlantic. We've got sailors right now working with partner navies down in Antarctica, which is really just a testament to the fact that we are a globally deployable, globally employed Navy. And for myself, my career has taken me to every continent in the world except Antarctica. Never did make it down there. I've gone around, pretty much sailed through every canal, around every Great Cape and everything else, except I never made it around Cape Horn. Never made it through the St. Lawrence Seaway. And until recently, this wasn't something that Canadian sailors would do. I never sailed through the Northwest Passage, but now that Harry DeWolf has done that on board a warship, that's one thing that I've had to add to my bucket list of things that I haven't quite done that yet, but maybe someday I'll have that experience in the Navy.
Absolutely. I hope you will as well. So when it comes to, I'm talking about ships and inanimate objects, but a ship doesn't sail without the crew. So talk to me about the formation you lead here at Maritime Forces Pacific. Talk to me about the makeup of the people that are under your command and kind of the breadth that they comprise.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, ships come to life through their crews. And so when we talk about people first mission always in the Canadian Armed Forces, we really mean that. So how do we make sure that we enable our people to be ready for the full gamut of tasks that they might have to take on a ship, and so that they're prepared for everything they could come across? That they're equipped with the right equipment, given the right training and the right technology to enable all of those jobs. So my job as Commander of Maritime Forces Pacific is really to lead a lot of the organization that generates those people. So I run the training system for the Navy. I am responsible for the Naval Reserve as well, so that's 24 Naval Reserve divisions across Canada, recruiting and employing Canadians from all walks of life who join the Navy on a part-time basis, but often offer full-time support and skills to enable us. The Canadian Submarine Force also falls under my responsibility, so how do we make sure that we generate that capability, maintain it, sustain it, so that it's employable when and where it's needed? And then I also run the formation out here, so oversee Canadian Fleet Pacific and the 5 frigates, 6 maritime coastal defense vessels, and the 8 training ships that we have here, as well as the fleet maintenance facility and the base. So it's a lot. In total, it's between 11 and 12,000 people, depending on how you choose to count who actually works for me. Mm-hmm. And a big part of my job these days is how do I build the right culture to make sure that every person comes to work, feels valued, included, feels welcome, and is able to tap into their full potential as a person. And we use a lot of cutting-edge technology in the Navy to make sure that people who really matter to us more than anything else are truly enabled in getting the job done.
So what are you doing to enable that culture and that that feeling where everyone is welcome and valued?
So we've put a lot of thought into how we do that, and I think one of the most important things is, especially in a large organization, one that tends to be very hierarchical and bureaucratic, is we need to make sure that people see people and rather than process. And so how do I make sure that we create something where there's empathy within the organization to see the person at the heart of that? No one goes into something trying to fail. Everybody wants to succeed. They want to do the best that they possibly can. So for us, it's about making sure that when someone isn't succeeding the way we want them to, that we understand why that is, and that we're working to enable them to be successful, as opposed to punishing them for not doing what we want or need them to do. Mm-hmm. So I like to think that the first thing we need to do when someone's not succeeding is look at a mirror and see what we're not doing to set that person up for success, and inculcate that across the organization. A lot of this begins by making sure that we value the contribution that every person can make, and that we don't see them as stereotypes, but we see them as the individuals. That fundamentally we're more alike than we are different. And when we see the person at the heart of that, I think we really do, start to be a better organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that there's a challenge in doing that purely because of the rank structure that a military entails? By necessity, of course, but every subordinate has to take orders and direction from their superior, and so when you are dictating orders to people, sometimes I guess maybe people can feel like, well, are they being fair, or are they being hard on me or not? I don't know.
So the challenge in any large organization is how do you achieve a consistency in terms of your culture and everything else? And one of the things is I can't be everywhere all at once.
Right.
I need to make sure that people understand what the vision is. They understand what the job that needs doing is, and that they're truly empowered to get on with things. And that means that occasionally people might get something wrong. And so we need to have a system that empowers people to get on with things, so that they know what they need to do. They are equipped to do it, trained to do it, set up for success. And then when it doesn't go right, we have an organization that takes a look at it and says, okay, why did that not succeed? Is there an ethical issue at the heart of that? Because then we need to really make sure we're dealing with that. But if there's an honest failure, an honest mistake, and that people are determined to learn from, then we can't overreact to that error. And we need to allow people the space to fail when it's safe to fail. And many times, I run a lot of training institutions. Failure is actually one of the best teachers. So how do we create an environment in which people can fail with only the right degree of consequence, in the sense that if you've taken care of people and you haven't damaged things, and you've done, mistakes can happen. We operate in a dangerous business. The act of taking ships to sea brings with it an inherent risk all of the time. So when something goes wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people did the wrong things. They may have done everything right, and that risk just manifested itself at the wrong moment. The wave hit in the wrong way, and there was no fault there. So we just need to make sure that we understand that. We pick those people up, we take care of them, and then we get them back into operations as quickly as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. You've kind of described a little bit about your leadership style, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, uh, you have served in the Royal Canadian Navy now for over 30 years. And so you've risen through the ranks, and you have been led, and now you're in a position to lead. So one of the things I'd love to hear is, how has your leadership style evolved over that time?
So I spent a lot of time reflecting on when did I feel sort of happiest in the organization, most sort of where I was like, wow, I really can't wait to go to work. And almost always those were environments in which I was told, this is what needs to be done, go get it done. And here are the things, right? So there's always rules that we can't break, and different ethical frameworks and different rule sets, and of course there's all of the different regulations and procurement authorities and different things like that that we have to follow. And so you don't ever have free and unfettered access to do whatever you want to do, but certainly within the rule set, it's amazing how much you can do if you take a look at every problem as a fresh opportunity to develop a different solution. And so when I've been given that freedom is when I felt the most sort of successful, the most engaged, the most excited about going to work. And so I spend a lot of time reflecting on, how do I create that environment? And how do I make sure that people don't need to come to me for a decision unless it's truly something I need to decide? And so a lot of the times when I get a briefing, it's really a case of, do I need to make this decision, or should someone lower than me be making this decision? Because often, closest to where things are actually happening is where they have the best sense of what needs to be done. And if you've created the right structure around that to make sure that you've bounded them so that they're not going to do something that's truly out of whack or wrong, then you really want those people to get on with it. And I'm amazed sometimes by the solutions that we develop to problems, the things that I'd have never tackled it that way, but that is incredibly effective, and so it's great. And so for me, it really is about meaningfully empowering people, and then at the same time making sure that that accountability framework's in place, so that when something goes wrong, we understand why it went wrong and we react appropriately to that.
Do you feel that the military writ large is embracing that approach and that type of culture? Because I think one of the things that people would like to know is that if you're, say, in the enlisted ranks, or if you're a junior officer, that you can actually come to your superiors with some ideas and it actually be embraced, or potentially embraced, at least heard.
Yeah, well, there's a whole host of stuff there. So one of the challenges is, how do you create a sense of psychological safety so that someone really does feel as though they can speak up and say, and as a military, that's absolutely essential, because we're potentially going to be in situations where there's an enemy trying to kill us and trying to make sure that we can't achieve our mission. And if somebody sees a danger in all of that, we need them to be willing to speak up and to say, hey, wait a second, have we thought about this? What about this possibility? And you can see that right now, I suspect that wasn't at all the case in Russia, and they weren't prepared for what they've encountered in Ukraine. And that's a sign of an organization that just, this is the way it's going to be, and keep carrying on. We need all of our people to be able to participate. We need to create an environment where they feel as though they can meaningfully step up and say what they think, and that we listen to that. That's really difficult to do. The other side of things that's tough is that, how do you create in our organization, we have a tendency, because we can know everything, especially people at my level, we want to know everything. And then we tend to default to, well, if I know about it, I need to do something about it. No, we have to really resist that temptation. I think that email has created a tyranny in our organization that has actually undermined our effectiveness in many senses. It's too easy to communicate a lot of low-level stuff, but everybody feels as though you have to react to it. And sometimes the best thing you can do is actually sort of like, okay, yeah, great, go solve, and leave people and trust people to solve those problems.
Right.
And so I do think there's a tendency, especially when something goes wrong, is to react to the outcome rather than understand, how do we get to that place? And if the decision-making process was actually good, and that everybody did everything they could to reasonably foresee the outcome, and that we're dealing with the consequences effectively, then we don't necessarily need to change something. Just because a bad thing happen doesn't mean we have to then overreact to it with a whole new set of processes and rules and different things. We want to make sure that we understand and manage those situations the right way.
Right. So in the Canadian Armed Forces, and certainly in the Royal Canadian Navy, you have a wide cross-section of people. I had the fortune to sail aboard HMCS Winnipeg recently, and it was very apparent to me that there were people from all different walks of life on board that one ship, which I thought was wonderful to see. Talk to me about diversity in the Canadian Armed Forces and in the Navy that you're part of?
Yeah, well, the first thing I have to say is we're not where we need to be. 71% of the Canadian Armed Forces remain white males. That's not a reflection of Canadian society. We're not tapping into the full potential of Canadian society. We are better when we represent the country, when we've got that full diversity of experience across all of the different measures, because that will mean that we're going to bring those different perspectives to the problem. We're going to see things differently, and we're going to be better prepared for everything the future could bring. So diversity is an operational necessity from our perspective. I'm heartened by the fact that we're doing better. We're seeing an increase in the number of women who are serving within the ranks of the Navy and going on to succeed. You know, there will be two women commanding frigates this summer in the Canadian Pacific Fleet. That's fantastic. It's an indication, I think, of how far we've come along there. We're not where we need to be for visible minorities. I really need to see more progress on that front. I'd love to see us do more in terms of Indigenous recruiting and retention and more there. But we're creating the environment in which we'll start to see people succeed, and we're seeing it reflected in the more junior ranks. And we're seeing it reflected in the Naval Reserve. The diversity down there is where it needs to be. Now what we need to do is carefully monitor how all of those groups progress, so that we don't inadvertently create a scenario where, you know, people aren't feeling welcome, aren't feeling included, aren't feeling as though they can really fully contribute to the organization. So we need to keep an eye on things, keep making sure that we're creating those opportunities, and that we don't fall victim to any sort of systemic issues or factors that we're not aware of that are pushing people out and not reflecting that diversity.
So what do you think, for those that are listening to this program, what do you think people should know about serving in the Navy, and how would you counsel somebody that is interested in the Navy? What would you say to them in terms of what to expect, and the type of life that somebody could expect in the Navy? Because unless you've been on a ship, perhaps you might not have any conception of what that entails.
Yeah, I think the Navy is a wonderful life. It really is an organization where you join it, you will see all of Canada and the world through the course of your career. It's also being a part of a team. And, you know, you can work for a lot of different companies, you can try and make a lot of different money, but it's the intrinsic motivation of serving your country, serving alongside some of the best Canadians, serving with some of the best equipment, best technology that Canada has to offer, and going out and really representing Canada on the world stage, making a difference for people in their lives each and every day. I think that's what's fantastic with the Navy. You know, our motto is ready to help, ready to lead, ready to fight, and we work to live up to that each and every day, and it is a fantastic life.
Awesome. So for those that might be interested in serving in the Canadian Armed Forces or in the Navy, you mentioned that you are in charge of training for the Navy. What is the process that if somebody was interested, how do they go about looking into this type of career? And what would you say? And are there any particular types of demographics? You know, you mentioned that there will be 2 women commanding officers for the frigates, for 2 of your frigates on this coast, which is wonderful. Are there demographics that you are coveting, or?
Well, all Canadians willing to serve, to be perfectly honest. You know, we would love to increase our diversity, but we're recruiting any Canadian interested in serving. All of the Naval Reserve divisions across Canada have a recruiting mandate. They're out in their communities actively trying to attract and recruit people into the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve, and we're offering component transfers from the Reserve into the regular force. There are Canadian Forces recruiting centres in most major cities in Canada, and we've got a decent web presence, though we're not where we want to be. I'd love to see us entirely digitally invested, get away from bricks and mortar recruiting offices, because the types of people we want to attract to the Navy are not people who have to walk into a building, walk into an office to get to join, but they're people who are digital natives who know how to navigate their way online and are excited about the opportunity of having a career that really reflects that digital basis.
Yeah. And once you're in the Navy, you mentioned the different types of ships that are in your formation or in the fleet, but within each ship there's so many different things that people can do, and I wonder if people really think about that. They might be prone to think that if you join the Navy you will be a sailor, or you're gonna do something on a ship, but just like the ship that we're on currently, HMCS Ottawa, the crew complement of this ship is how many?
It's about 240 people all up when we deploy it overseas in operations, and it reflects the full complement of services. So we've got cooks on board, we've got people who are stores technicians, we've got human resources and finance specialists, alongside people who operate the radars, who fire the guns and missiles, who deploy the underwater sensors, who maintain the weapons and the equipment, the main machinery. So, and then we've got the sailor, the bosuns, who are really responsible for all of the seamanship stuff and operate our small boats, and then the officers who lead each of those departments and divisions. So it's, whatever you are interested in doing, the Navy has a place for you. And I think what I'd say is the other great advantage we have is that you know where you're going to wind up living. You're going to be in Halifax or Victoria, and those are two fantastic parts of Canada. And even though I grew up in Ottawa, I love the water, and the fact that my happy place is being out on the water on the coast, and that's what the Navy is all about: is that opportunity to go to sea and go and see new places. And we live in great places.
Yeah. It's a really, really interesting life, and one that I've had the privilege to observe with the help of people like yourself. I was going to ask you, tell me an interesting sea story that you have from your career, something that you think back on and go, that was an awesome time, or maybe a time of adversity, or maybe a time of elation, whatever. I would love to hear an example of something that you've encountered, that you've experienced in your career, that hopefully somebody will enjoy to hear the story.
Yeah, I think there was a deployment I did in 2007 aboard HMCS Toronto that really was fantastic with the 5 and 6 year old demographic, because it involves sharks and pirates and volcanoes and all sorts of great sea stories. And I think one of the things that stands out from that deployment is, I was part of a NATO task group, we were heading into the Red Sea, and what you never expect to have happen is a volcano to erupt on an island near where you're sailing.
Right.
And sure enough, just a few dozen miles ahead of us was a small island. It belonged to Yemen. It was claimed by Eritrea, so it was garrisoned by a group of Yemeni soldiers. And then all of a sudden, one afternoon, the volcano erupted. And I don't even know that those soldiers knew that they were on a volcanic island. So they fled, and there were 29 of them. And they ran. The Yemeni Coast Guard was able to rescue about 21 of them, get them off, but the other 8 ran into the water. And we were a nearby task group, so we responded. And by the time we got there, it was evening. You could really see the volcano, the lava entering the water. I wound up, taking a couple of small boats and going and patrolling the waters near an active volcano with lava's flowing into it to try and find any of these soldiers that we knew were missing. And we searched through the night without success. And in the morning, it had been over 20 hours since the soldiers had to go into the water, and so we thought, it's not likely. The Yemeni Coast Guard was back on scene. They were searching, and so we called off the search and we started to head off. And literally, just as we were sort of coming up to speed to head off, one of our sailors, an amazing young woman, spotted someone in the water, and we were able to rescue this 18-year-old Yemeni private who had been swimming for 22 hours at that point.
Wow! And
his will to live was just incredible, and it taught me just how resilient humans can be, what the power of that desire to live can be, and also the fact that you just never want to give up hope sometimes that you can find something. And so to actually rescue someone in that case and be able to return them to their country, to their family, was fantastic.
If there's a story to end this interview on, I think that's the one. Admiral Topshee, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That's my pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.